Howdy there, boys. Today we're going to be talking about what you got to do to be a real deer hunting, monster truck driving, hot-blooded, masculine man. It's hard work being a man. Gotta wake up every single day at 6 in the morning, pour a bucket of ice water over your head, and then make some bacon grease fried bread in a cast iron pan. Then you gotta get ready for a long day of bear chasing in the woods with a nice bottle of whiskey and a big old shotgun. Don't get it twisted now, the shotgun is if you run into minorities out there. You have to kill the bear with your bare hands. That's why we call it bare arms. And make sure your whiskey is a nice American bourbon. Scotch is European, and all Europeans are dirty homosexuals. You always gotta make sure to stay on top of your mind, too. Flag down Satan, make sure he doesn't put any weird demonic thoughts up in there. If you find yourself thinking hard about that bear overpowering you, pulling down your tight blue jeans and putting his big veiny bear in your and filling you up with his bear while he calls you his little boy, that's just Satan putting that thought in your head. You gotta think of manly things instead, like cars and motor oil, a big sweaty mechanic in grease-stained overalls working hard on the drive shaft of a muscle car. I mean, you gotta think about women with, big titties and a nice round ass, and I promise you, son, that boner's gonna be gone in a jiffy. You have to conserve it to have with your wife, in the missionary position, of course, for the sole purpose of procreation. Then you can be thinking about that bear fight, about how he almost got you this time, but you survived, so you're here and you can fulfill your marital duties. But maybe next time he gonna get you. I wish I had an easy and convenient way to transition out of this bit. I kinda don't. Really, mainly I want to show off this cool glass I have. It's not even whiskey in there, it's amaretto. I don't think I have whiskey in the house right now. Seriously though, if that's not what a real man is, then what is? Because you probably clicked on this video for a reason. You might be worried that you're not man enough. You might be wondering if you're feeling the right way about yourself being who you are, if you feel masculine enough to satisfy that image of yourself. I know this is at this point a tight statement, but masculinity is in crisis. It has been for quite some time, and unfortunately not too much has been done to actually address this issue because, and this is true even in our modern day enlightened societies, unfortunately, we don't really care all that much about men in crisis. We don't, not care at all, but at the end of the day, if you're a guy and you have problems, shut the fuck up about it and figure it out. This is an attitude that exists in pretty much all strata and subgroups of society to one extent or another, and I reckon that most men think they really have to live up to that ideal. Which is fucked up. I mean, think about that for a minute, right? You're only valid when you're not having issues. Humans are not built for that kind of shit. We're communal creatures. We are supposed to seek advice and support from our fellow human beings. Denying anyone the ability to do that and consigning them to exile whenever they are not feeling their best is quite frankly disgusting. This is one of the many things that in feminist theory is known as toxic masculinity. Now hang on there, gentlemen. I know a lot of you are wandering the mouse to the close window button because I said the dreaded F word. Give me a moment to explain myself here. Now it is true that I would personally describe myself as a feminist as much as I ascribe any sort of label to myself, especially in something that isn't like one ideology, but actually a million different ideologies that all hate each other. There is no such thing as the feminism. So what I like to say is that I'm a feminist with like a big ol' asterisk, which is true about most people, they just don't explicitly state it. I believe that feminism has done a lot to help women escape from the oppressive gender norms of patriarchy, and I think that's a very good thing. However, I also believe that in practice, it has failed to do this for men as well. It hasn't done nothing, of course. I think that men's lives have improved significantly from the feminist thought revolution, but I also think that most of those factors that are now better in our lives are sort of side effects of the liberation of women from patriarchy. Which is fair enough, you know, the building that's burning maybe is the one where you should put out the fire first. And yes, actually, the idea that men are also oppressed by the gender norms of patriarchy is actually a foundational axiom of feminist theory. It's just that a lot of people seem to forget this, especially like some very loud, very active feminists. The whole genre of memes about like male tears and how like men should just stop whining about the problems that happen to them in society, that is ironically self-described feminists furthering patriarchal gender norms. And this sort of general underperformance in the department of male liberation from patriarchy is something that a lot of young men especially seem to have realized and sort of taken issue with in the world of feminism. There is, in the actual real world outside of the purely theoretical realm of academia, a very common phenomenon of especially young men being like blamed for shit they never did or contributed to, guilt-tripped from like an original sin perspective even almost, just because they are guys. And you might be tempted to go like, oh, I'm a woman and I've never seen this happening to a guy. Trust me, it happens. Most young men have had some experience where that kind of thing was thrown in their face by a small group of like self-righteous cunts with an axe to grind. And it's a very alienating experience. Just imagine, in a completely hypothetical scenario that I'm sure has never happened to any woman ever, that somebody tells you that there is something fundamentally wrong with your gender. That was sarcasm, by the way. I was being sarcastic. I know that it's difficult to tell with me sometimes, but that was sarcasm. And I'm not even saying that people guilt-tripping young men and like blaming them for shit don't have a point at all. We all still run around with a lot of ideas from patriarchy in our heads because those have still survived the idea purges. They still exist, and that's just how we were raised. But I don't think that we should be blaming men for the way that they were socialized. This, I think, has been a major driving force in why feminism as it exists today has often been unjustly but understandably maligned. And leaving these issues that young men have completely unaddressed and even shaming them for it has left a huge wide open space for attack by some old school reactionaries who would really love to bring patriarchy back onto the menu. Especially to many young men for whom the ideals of feminism have been mainstream values for their entire lives, like who grew up with just that being the thought of the time. It can feel like they were left alone, like they've been left behind, like they're in need of guidance and they can't get any. And it just doesn't look like feminism as a movement has any intention of changing that. And that's even though there's plenty of people within that movement that have sort of dedicated a significant amount of their intellectual time to doing this. It's not like there's a shortage on smart theory written by smart academics decades ago. But the thing is, most people don't care about theory, and they don't know about it either. I don't have time to read Judith Butler. I have to memorize the domains of the Daedric princes. Is the dog and the guy, are they like the one Daedric prince, or is the dog a separate companion? What a lot of young men find themselves confronted with in the process of waking up is that on one hand, they see like the vestiges of patriarchy, the bones of the carcass of the old beast, and then on the other hand, they see this vision of masculinity created by modern women to shape the ideal man into whatever it is that might be comfortable, convenient for them. Much like the vision of the ideal woman used to be shaped by what was convenient and comfortable for men. Which also very liberally includes a lot of vestigial patriarchy, especially in the realm of an almost pathological emotional objectification of men as robots who essentially just are there to support women. Any of this sound familiar? Have you heard about any of this before? And just to be clear, I don't think this is what most women think. I'm saying this is what most young men see when they look at the world. So I think it ought to be understandable why a lot of young men have over the years decided that they don't like what they are seeing and said, you know what, I'm gonna go out there on my own and find my own self-concept in this whole man thing. So some have taken it upon themselves to bring about that liberation because, and this is also true, being a man under patriarchy, unless you are part of a very, very tiny, very, very powerful minority of men that was born into the right station, it fucking sucks, dude. But because feminism still pretty universally claims the monopoly over the idea of freeing any sort of gender from the patriarchy, it can often appear as though the actual practical movement is investing a lot more time into destroying efforts to help men get out of patriarchy than it actually invested in efforts to get men out of patriarchy. Like, there's still protests whenever someone is trying to open a shelter for battered men, even though that demographic is critically underserved. And unfortunately, the destruction of those efforts to free men from patriarchy prove most effective in the kinds of spaces that are more closely aligned with feminism ideologically. You know, people who value feminist insights and opinions in order to free men from patriarchy. So there's been a sort of selective pressure to give the predominant position in this quest for rediscovering masculinity in the modern day to like far-right type people who don't care about the pink-haired screeching SJWs. And those tend to be either patriarchal gender norms dressed up as not being patriarchal gender norms, or patriarchal gender norms as seen through rose-tinted glasses for a time when men had it easier and they weren't getting pissed on by those pesky women all the time. And they all come with a healthy dose of misogyny, the real spice of life. Seriously, put some misogyny on your saag paneer, it's great, I promise. So in this video, I am going to be drawing very liberally from feminism and feminist theory, and I won't apologize for it because there's no reason to. Because it was, after all, feminism that first described the concept of patriarchy, and they have a lot of experience liberating one gender from it, so it would be stupid not to make use of those insights to do it for another gender. Now that we have this out of the way, what is it that we are supposed to do? Now, what I always like to do is leave any sort of ideology and like this idea is related to this and this person came up with that thing. Just leave it out the door, don't give a shit. Let's just look at the things that we can use for ourselves and then work from there. Because my first gripe already begins with the question, how to be a real man. We focus so much on the real part when I think the word that we should be focusing on is the A part of the sentence. Much like there is no singular universal way of being a real woman, there is no singular universal way to be a real man. A lot of the concepts that we're going to be talking about in this video are things that a lot of women or people of any number of other genders or a lack thereof might find interesting interesting and worth striving for. And if that's the case for you, go for it. This is actually, my grandpa used to be very progressive in a weirdly regressive way, where when I was a little boy, he would always tell me to, like, take the example of that girl that lives up the street. She's strong. She could teach me how to be a real man. When she scrapes her knees open, she doesn't cry. He was still instilling, like, toxic gender norms, but points for trying, I guess. Any idealized vision of masculinity is really just a collection of ideas that you can take a gander at and pick out from what suits you best. They're supposed to help you build a healthier relationship with yourself. Even as you are looking for guidance, you need to realize that everyone is different. You are a unique individual sitting there in a particular situation. This right here, the shirt and the hairy chest and the blues music at the whiskey bar, this isn't masculinity. It's just an aesthetic. It's a coat of paint. Don't get me wrong, your aesthetic is important, but the only thing that's important about it is that you have to feel comfortable wearing it. That's the point of an aesthetic. It has to express who you are and how you feel. And if that's a black raincoat, or that's a colorful Hawaiian shirt, or that's like a long hair ponytail with piercings type deal, or a pretty little summer dress with flowers and like little owls on it. Whatever makes you feel like yourself, whatever feels comfortable on your skin, that's your aesthetic. That is the masculine thing for you to be wearing. If you want to change it up once in a while, be my guest. It's your aesthetic. Seriously though, put on the fucking dress. Frankly, if your journey into discovering your own masculinity leads you down the path of realizing and admitting to yourself that you're actually a woman or some other gender, and you were just assigned the wrong one at birth, you should go for that. Conversely, by the way, if you're like a trans man and you're worried that because you like some girly things that makes you not man enough, think again. Motherfucker, you are fucking valid. I like me an old-fashioned, I like me a Moscow Mule, but I also like my girly drinks because they're full of flavor and they're colorful and they look nice. Anyone tells you you have to prove that you're a man, fuck them. Fuck that guy. Or that, person. Whatever. Fuck him, is the point. That's the first thing that we need to get rid of. This idea of, like, performative masculinity. Masculinity is something that you do to prove that you are a man. It's all just aesthetics. Paint your house whatever way you like. We're gonna be talking about the actual structure of the building and how you can make that work for you. So the first thing that makes up a man is self-reliance. And I'm not talking about the being an emotionally stunted, antisocial ghoul type of self-reliance that is often touted as one of the great war horses of toxic masculinity. This is about self-love and self-esteem, the ability to see yourself as a full and valid human being no matter who you are. As a man, you've probably been socialized to derive all of your self-worth from the value you can provide to other people, be that in actual service or in like the action potential of value you can provide to others. Might be the size of your bank account, the security of your job, the price tag on your house, or the authority of your social station. Especially in modern times, I feel like your willingness to be of service has become one of the big benchmarks, not of necessarily masculinity, but of your worth as a man. Especially if, given the economic circumstances that a lot of us find ourselves in, because of the time at which we were born, you don't have much else to offer. This is also why men are expected to go die in war. Our value is fundamentally measured in how useful we can be to the people whom we serve. This is the male half of the experience of objectification and commodification in the dating market. You are worth nothing unless you can trade yourself so others can give you emotional validation. Men are socialized to be entirely reliant on external emotional validation. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but the primary means in society to control men and get them to do what you want is by being emotionally withholding. You know this cartoon of like the guy who has an umbrella and he's holding it over his wife's head, even though clearly he is pissed at her? This is an ideal of toxic masculinity. Your emotional state is irrelevant. You exist solely to render service unto others, to make them happy, so they will keep you happy. And just to make this clear, this isn't like women just doing this. The trope of the emotionally withholding father, who that's somehow his way of making sure the son achieves things by never telling him that he's proud of him, that's huge. A great exception to this in the realm of females is, for many men, not me personally, but you know, it's very common, their mum. This is a woman who loves them unconditionally, shows that love, and especially during their youths, performs a lot of acts of service for them. I genuinely think that this is the less sinister part of why acts of service are such a love language for so many men, and why they associate the concept of unconditional love so much with someone who cooks and cleans for them. And it is perfectly fine to have that kind of relationship with someone so long as it's born out of a place of mutual respect and egalitarian understanding. But it so rarely is, because women have such strong social pressures to fit into that role, regardless of whether men associate that with unconditional love. And frankly, a lot of men lack the ability to take care of themselves because they are socialized to expect to be like living in their own filth, and then eventually some woman will come by and take care of them. And I think that in part, this is an aspect of men being able to emotionally validate themselves. A self-reliant, self-loving man cleans his own home for himself. I see a lot of like life coaches and these sort of weird pickup artists that exist in the in-between space of being extremely toxic and actually helpful. And they're like, oh, if you need to build some self-confidence so you can get pussy. And you know, that kind of social clout does come with confidence. And I think that maybe for someone who is completely lacking in the even experience of self-confidence, that might be a good motivator to like get started. But ultimately, the reason you should be building self-confidence is so you can be your own best friend and validate yourself as your own life partner, really. And part of that is being your own mum. It's taking care of yourselves and the surroundings that have an effect on you in your daily life. Jordan Peterson isn't entirely incorrect when he says that. Think about this. Men tend to only really clean up their apartments when they know a woman is coming over. That's when they do it. Sometimes even all kinds of other guests, but the only point of cleaning the place up that you occupy at all times, the only people who are worth that are other people and not yourself. Why is that? Getting your environment in line with your own personal cleanliness standards, whatever those might be, frankly, that's a highly individual type of thing, is fundamentally an act of self-love, because you deserve to feel comfortable in your own home. Taking care of your personal hygiene is certainly something that others will appreciate, but that is also one of those things that you're supposed to do for yourself. And if you need a refresher on what that entails, I made a whole video on it many years ago. Now, I do realize that this is kind of hypocritical coming from someone whose apartment looks the way it does, but my excuse is my brain doesn't give me dopamine unless the thing that I clean is really very dirty, and that's not a normal thing. Most people, when they clean anything, has a little bit of dopamine. It doesn't happen for me. It has nothing to do with self-love. Self-love is so much more than the Jordan Peterson meme. Another key part of it is to own your emotions. It's no big secret that men have difficulty showing and frankly even feeling their own emotions. It's how we were socialized by patriarchy. Expressing emotions takes up space, and as a man, you are not allowed to take up emotional space. Now, negative emotions like sadness take up more space, but this is also true about positive emotions like happiness. As a man, you're not even really allowed to be openly and very publicly happy, because that shit is gay. Literally where the word gay comes from, by the way. To be gay is to be happy, and so that's... yeah. If you need more examples, there's a whole genre of memes of, like, manly men just sort of making fun of guys for liking Funko Pops. Full disclosure, I'm not entirely sure what Funko Pops are. I'm sure there's some sort of horrible outgrowth of consumer capitalism, but why do you gotta fucking shit on people for, like, liking them? The idea is that men must be stoic for two reasons. One of them is you always need to be there, available, and dependable when others need you to make sacrifices for them, and you always need to be in full control of yourself and your surroundings. This is why crying is one of the least acceptable emotional expressions for men, because it's an uncontrollable sort of weeping that makes you vulnerable to attacks from the people around you. It's a loss of control. Goes without saying, part of the problem is also that you are bringing your emotions to the outside and making them other people's problems, and that is never acceptable as a man. And this is why men pretty much only cry when we are alone. We're never really given the right tools to manage our own emotions, aside from just don't feel them. Which also means that when you are emotionally close with someone and, like, so connected to them that you can cry in front of them as a man, which doesn't happen very often, you're also much more vulnerable to emotional manipulation from that person, which, once again, in our society, is one of the main ways in which we control men. 99% of people have no interest in manipulating us, of course, but the fear of it happening, because we are aware on some level that this is a vulnerability that we have, and also the need to live up to the gender expectations makes sure that we keep it all nice and bottled up. This is also the reason why anger is pretty much the only emotion that men are supposed to be expressing, and they are supposed to be expressing it rather liberally too. Anger is an emotion of power. When you are angry, you are focused and in control. You become a force to be reckoned with. And just to make this clear, there is nothing wrong with being angry and expressing that you are angry. The reason we humans evolved anger is to be able to thrive in antagonistic situations, and in life, you will often find yourself in antagonistic situations where you need to sharpen your mind and fuel your resolve. That's what anger is there for. The problem is that for many men, anger has become a sort of maladaptive stand-in for all emotions, especially negative ones. But even, like, men when they're happy, some of them get angry. The more we push our emotions to the side, the less we own them, and the more terrified of them we become. Just because you don't feel them doesn't mean they go away. They just get put into little containers that continually fill up and get heated like pressure cookers, and at some point they're gonna burst. They're like those little plaques of fat and whatever the fuck other stuff that run through your bloodstream and will eventually cause you to die of heart disease. When anger is the only thing you are allowed to feel, everything becomes just a reverberation of that. Any emotion that you might be feeling is only expressed in red-hot fury. And because when you are feeling significant emotion, often a lot of the other emotions that you've also been feeling, they like come close because you've been putting them away for too long, this now feels like a different survival situation that you are also in. Because no matter what's going on here that's making you angry, here there's this existential threat of all the bottled up feelings that you have conserved for years. Dealing with unresolved emotions is powerful and to many men unfamiliar, so it registers as dangerous. So a very crucial aspect of being self-reliant is that you need to feel, accept, and express the emotions that you have. In other words, you need to practice emotional hygiene. And you don't just do this for others around you so they don't have to witness your outbursts. In fact, they are a very, very, very secondary concern. Running around with a fuck ton of unresolved feelings and being unable to authentically experience emotion as it comes up is going to seriously impact your ability to be happy. And your ability to be happy isn't just important, it is essential. Now, just like many women developed ways of coping with the stresses of patriarchy, so did many men. It's just that the techniques of men are different from the techniques of women because they tackle different problems. And I often find that there is a sort of mutual lack of empathy for why these techniques are important to these people. It really strikes me the wrong way that essentially overnight, when feminism happened, then the expectation is now that, like this, men must now be able to deal with their emotions in the exact same way women do. They have to use the exact same techniques. You know, just one day to the next, all men now have to immediately be able to always express their emotions and openly talk about them with everyone. If you don't cry at the drop of a hat, you are emotionally stunted and a soulless psychopath. Just lie down on the couch and do talk therapy with this stranger. A lot of men are sort of wary of this, and I think a lot of women don't really understand why. Here's my completely laymanly theory, right? Okay, so here's the thing. In patriarchy, we all know women had very little recourse to exert power back over men, even though men were exerting a lot of power over them. However, and this comes back to something I said earlier, men were socialized to never be masters of their own emotions, and that left them wide open for emotional manipulation. This, to women as a group, became their only way of defending themselves against the forces of patriarchal society. So because the cleanup of patriarchy has been rather one-sided in many modern relationships in the realm of emotional violence, where men generally do not have the upper hand, there's still a lot of shit going on that is considered acceptable but really shouldn't be. And of course, you, once again, fair lady watching this video, seething at the implication I am making, would never do such a thing as horrible as using something that a man, revealed to you in a moment of weakness as a weapon against that person later, or do any of the other weird things of emotional violence, because you have self-reflection and you're a feminist and you know what's going on. And yes, men, most women would never dream of doing that kind of thing to you. In fact, they find it rather appalling. But let me recontextualize this into sort of a frame of reference that women might be more familiar with. Most men would never dream of sexually assaulting a woman either. They find the idea of it rather appalling, in fact. Yet there is such a significant minority of men who do it to such an extent that pretty much all women have a not at all unreasonable fear of being sexually assaulted. Frankly, it happens to a lot of women. And so they take precautions to avoid that kind of thing happening, even though they really shouldn't have to. This is what happens with men and emotional abuse. And this kind of emotional abuse culture is still alive and a problem to this day. A solution for this that men have come up with is male spaces. And I'm not talking like male-dominated hobbies, though for many men, they serve as exactly that, often to the detriment of women who just want to be able to join the hobby because they find the hobby interesting. You know the girlfriend you have that really hates all men, and you're trying to be emotionally supportive of her because you know she's been hurt and she's in pain and all that, but kind of internally you roll your eyes? That's, to us guys, the guy who hates women at the Magic the Gathering tournament. The purpose of male spaces is partly to give us a reprieve from this fear of emotional violence that many men have, and to give us a space to express the emotions that we'd usually not be allowed to express anywhere to, you know, like approach even a vague specter of emotional health. Because in the way we were socialized, it's especially bad for a man to be expressing emotions in the presence of women, which is of course extra stupid because the people who will actually admonish a man for expressing his emotions is much more likely to be other men than any woman. This is the male equivalent of how the majority of the people doing slut-shaming are women. Both of these are still patriarchy. Male spaces are often structured in a way that they help affirm our masculinity. It's manly to be out on the lake, on a boat, fishing with a couple bottles of nice lager in the icebox, some beef jerky next to the icebox. It becomes a sort of ritualistic space where you are ironically allowed to express a lot of the more unmanly emotions that you have, because the manliness meter by the things around you, it's filled up. You're very much already performing masculinity, so now you can afford to shed some of that to express your emotions. And I cannot stress enough how important it is to affirm a man's masculinity in order to get him to express his emotions. I very often see women going, oh, I'm gonna do flowers and cuddles and the nice hot chocolate and a warm blankie and some stuffed animals. That's uncomfortable for men. This is not gonna, I mean, some men this will make them express their emotions. Of course, you know, not everyone is exactly the same. But generally speaking, this feels even threatening because it's so unmasculine. It doesn't affirm the masculinity. It doesn't fill up the masculinity meter, so we have to perform masculinity by not expressing any emotions. This is why I have such a huge problem with this idea that male spaces need to be eliminated or regulated. I am not, by any possible interpretation of what I am saying that we should exclude women from male-dominated hobbies. I think that's stupid and counterproductive, and it's also the precise opposite of what most men in those hobbies want. But I think it's very important to understand why male spaces are so essential to male emotional expression. And just to make this clear, I think women can be part of those spaces also. It's just difficult, but I do know plenty of girls who have become part of the boys, and it works just fine. A huge reason why we have those like bathhouses is so men can experience a degree of tenderness and camaraderie without fear of reprisals. Because exposing yourself to reprisals is weakness, and weakness is anathema to the way that we were socialized. And to expect us to just overnight immediately adapt to a new paradigm of how emotions are supposed to be experienced, to just deal with it, and instead of allowing us to work through the generations of suffering that men have experienced at the hands of patriarchy is in itself patriarchal. This urge to police everything and basically go, oh, we'll just deprive men of any and all emotional outlets that they may possibly have, and so they will have to adapt to our new paradigm that we have control over, or they will just die inside, is a highly toxic mindset that you should seriously consider overthinking. Would it be ideal if all men could just easily relate to their emotions? Maybe. Maybe not. Everyone is an individual, and everyone should be able to find their own ways to cope. And for each of us men, this is going to be a highly individual path, and it is going to be a difficult path, but it is a path we need to trek down, because it's not just going to be able to allow us to, experience and accept the emotions that we have, but to also not, admonish ourselves for having them. One of my personal issues in this realm is, for instance, I really struggle with crying. Sometimes I know for weeks that I have to do it, but I just don't know how to make it happen. And so stays bottled up, and it stresses me the fuck out. A lot of women will tell me, oh, just watch a sad movie and you'll empathize with the sad characters and then you'll cry. And to be fair, that sometimes works, but usually it doesn't. As a result, I cry maybe twice a year. And I'm not sure that's particularly healthy, personally. I'm pretty sure that's not very healthy. Because crying is such an essential mechanism of releasing emotional pressure. It's incredible. Pretty much after every time that you have done any amount of crying, you feel a lot better because all of that pressure has vented. You no longer have to instinctively strain to hold it in, which is so exhausting. You really owe it to your well-being, and I owe it to my well-being to learn how to cry. And don't pressure yourself in the process of doing that, or in the process of whatever emotional expression you may be struggling with. There's no such thing as failure here, just progress. I say this because men do have a tendency to sort of punish ourselves for things that we did wrong, even if it's things that we have absolutely no control over. Whenever something isn't exactly right, somehow it's our fault. But even when you do legitimately fail at this kind of thing, you shouldn't punish yourself over it. Failure is such an existential dread to men, because when we fail, we stop performing the thing that makes us valuable. So even the idea of failure makes us essentially stop existing. In this kind of situation, and really in any kind of situation when you're feeling down, it really helps to be your own best friend and to comfort yourself, because you punishing yourself is not gonna make you better. And if this is very utterly foreign to you, as it was to me at one time, just imagine that you have yourself as a best friend with you who loves you unconditionally, who always, no matter what is happening, supports you completely. And think about how they might react to your situation and what they might have to say. And it doesn't matter that this friend's perspective would be biased and obviously they would be on your side. Yes, that is exactly the point of all this. You need to be in your own corner and support yourself. This should be your go-to strategy when you are in distress. And I realize that it can feel very weird to be gay and tender with yourself. This is because you've been socialized to not own your own emotions, so you remain controllable by other people. It is an act of great pride and great self-reliance to be gay and tender with yourself. The lone wolf survives only by hugging himself for warmth. And outside of that, of course, having external factors to build your confidence is great. Once you have that best friend sort of implanted in your head, even just conceptualized, I encourage you to make a list of things that you like about yourself. From that baseline, you can grow, and also realize that a lot of men think of growth in a really not very productive way. Becoming better isn't something you do for others. You don't do it to impress them. It is a constant process that you engage in for yourself. Because, quite frankly, you're the only one who's really keeping track. Don't worry about the hobbies and interests that other people think you should have in order to be masculine. Do the things that you find interesting, the things that bring you joy. That's what it's about. That's how you have hobbies out of a place of self-love. A lot of men think of growth as this thing that if I achieve X, I will get Y. But that's not what it's about. Real, actual personal growth is something you do for yourself so you feel better about yourself than you did yesterday. And you don't have to do huge leaps of growth every single day. The act of taking a break from growth for a little bit is in itself an act of personal growth, because it means that you're cutting yourself some fucking slack once in a while. Self-care is so much more than just a bunch of things that you do in order to function better. It's about having a positive attitude toward your own comfort, and realizing that your comfort is important. Another thing I believe should be a cornerstone of modern masculinity is kindness and support for your fellow human beings. You could, if you're feeling traditional, call it magnanimity, like the wise king is magnanimous with everyone he meets. He doesn't need to moderate everyone, he doesn't need to prove that he's the king, he doesn't need to punish every indiscretion. He has great power and uses it to give to be of service to his people. Once you have established a foundation of self-love and self-reliance, it becomes much easier, ironically, to rely on others, which is essential because we as humans are built to rely on others, especially in times of crisis. As much as you need some self-reliance, you cannot, as a human being, be fully autonomous. We just don't work that way. And though you shouldn't define your value by the value you can give to others, and you need to have healthy boundaries for yourself and your own well-being, it's very rewarding to be there for other people. Being self-reliant does not diminish the value of compliments that you receive from others and the love that you receive from them. And when it comes to compliments and love that you give out to others, it makes it better because it's more genuine. Self-reliance combined with kindness makes you more willing to be a positive, contributing member of your community. Think for a moment about all of those many videos that you've seen that just make you cringe because there's cringe people in them doing cringe things, and that makes you cringe. And really what they're doing is they're like pretending to go Super Saiyan, or they're, throwing imaginary fireballs, they're playing around with the katana, whatever dorky shit makes them happy. Or another classic, someone is trying something but failing, like a gentleman with the corporeal firmness of a wet washcloth is trying and failing to lift any significant amount of weights. And what happens as you cringe at that is that your mirror neurons are trying to put you into the position of that person and ascertaining how you would feel if this were happening to you. And because you have no foundation for healthy self-indulgence or endurance for personal growth just for yourself, you feel bad. You cringe because you do not love yourself. And you comment that what's happening here is cringe because you do not love yourself. Meanwhile, the guy doing the Naruto run is experiencing happiness because he's doing something that he likes to do, no matter if other people like it or not. The guy trying and failing to play the piano is learning. He is growing. He is improving himself for his own sake because he values himself enough to allow himself to fail. All of these people are true, legitimate chads, and you should let them know that. Because much like there is no one true aesthetic that is truly masculine, there is no loadout of interests and hobbies that is truly masculine. There's plenty of giant buff dudes with protein shakes for blood that is still constantly putting down everyone that they run into, especially in the field that they are an expert on, no matter if they're actually doing something wrong or not. And the reason they do that is because despite of being so loaded and jacked up, they have no actual real self-confidence. If you like woodworking and fishing, that's fine. If you like cooking and knitting, like scarves and stuff, that's just as fine. What makes you masculine is your constant journey to find out more about who you are, what you like, what defines you, and how to be kind to yourself and others. That journey might not take you where you think it will, but it certainly will take you to a place that's better than wherever you are now. And though we all make this journey on our own, we also undertake it together, too. One of my favorite sentences in the world to say is "hell yeah, brother," because it means that someone is thriving, and I love seeing people thrive. For the purposes of kindness, empathy is such a useful skill because it allows me to feel good for the accomplishments of others. There is such a powerful streak of almost pathological competitiveness in the way that men are raised. From a very early age, we are told that we are always competing for the #1 spot in everything that we do. And only the person who makes the #1 spot gets all the money, opportunity, pussy, and cocaine. Because of this bullshit attitude, for a lot of men, when they see other men being successful, or really other people being successful, but primarily men, because we're socialized to compete with them most of all, they feel jealous because someone else succeeding, even if it is at something that they're not even trying to compete at, is a threat to their success. And as a man, If you're not successful, you don't exist. And it can be very difficult for men to get this out of our heads, and I think part of the reason for that is because we are never taught the skill of empathy. I don't think empathy as a skill is taught in general, but a lot of women have to learn it as they grow up, and they have more access to resources within their social circles to learn it. The reasons for this are very fucked up though. It's like a defense strategy. If, like me, you grew up in an abusive household, you might have also learned empathy, no matter what your gender is, in order to sort of manage the emotions of the people that you had around yourself at all times, to protect yourselves from their retribution, because they themselves had no interest in managing their own emotions. That's not an okay way to grow up. That's not an okay way to think about empathy, and the fact that this is the main reason why so many women are forced to learn empathy kinda doesn't produce very good outcomes for anyone involved. Fundamentally, empathy is the ability to conceptualize how other people feel and to make considerations for your own behavior that take into account how they feel. Now, especially for those among us who use empathy as a sort of defense mechanism to make sure that they themselves are protected from danger, it's very important to learn that other people's feelings are not sacred. You are allowed to upset people. Everyone, including yourself, has the responsibility of managing their own emotions. No one has the right to expect the rest of the world to shrink to their willingness to accept reality for what it is. It's rather narcissistic to move through the world expecting never to feel uncomfortable. However, on the other hand, especially for the people that you value, it is good to be able to consider how your words and actions might impact them. This not only allows you to more effectively help them with the things that they might need help with, but often just the act of trying to understand them can make them feel better. And do note that I said attempting. You don't even have to be particularly successful at this. For a lot of people, when they are talking about their pain, what they're trying to do is not feel alone with it. And knowing that someone is trying to understand them accomplishes that. This is such a stereotypical conversation between the man and the woman of the nuclear family, where she's complaining about something, and then the man is like, oh, well, here's a bunch of solutions to fix this problem of yours. And then she's like, oh, why are you always trying to fix everything? I just wanted to say the things. And then he's left confused because I was trying to help you do this, you had problems and I was trying to make them go away. Sometimes you have to sit down and just complain about the fact that the problem exists and that you're going to have to fix it. It's a very normal human instinct that will actually give you the strength to go fix that problem. Some people don't work like this, but a lot of people do, and that's okay. It makes them feel good, and I argue that a real man should be striving for the people around him to feel good. Now, I have already alluded to this, but it is very important that you don't do this to your own detriment. This very specifically isn't deriving value from what you can provide to others. Everyone is still responsible for their own happiness. You can just contribute extra to it. You being there for your community, and by that I also mean total strangers, because at the point at which you are interacting with the total stranger is part of your community, is something you do in addition to being there for yourself. I made a whole video about this, how you can't pour from an empty cup, and you need to be self-loving in order to love others properly. But how do you learn empathy when you have barely any idea how it works? Well, luckily, empathy is not a thing that you either have or don't. It's a skill that you can learn. Even people who literally physically cannot experience empathy because their mirror neurons are all fucked up can approximate the experience. This is a technique explained to me by my man Schizoid Angst, who is himself a towering pillar of masculinity, currently pretty much reforming the academic opinion of the condition of schizoid personality disorder, which is an incredible achievement. He calls it intellectual empathy, and the way it works is that he puts himself into the other person's shoes, not necessarily attempting to experience what they are experiencing, but imagining how he himself would feel about what is happening. So for instance, instead of cutting someone off in traffic, he thinks, it would be rather inconvenient if I were to be cut off in traffic. Therefore, I will not do this to this other person. I know this basically boils down to the golden rule. This very basic example to sort of illustrate this technique if you need a way to get started. I know that for a lot of us men, the mirror neuron section is like completely atrophied because we're encouraged to never be empathetic with anyone. But as with most things, if you practice, it will get better. As a bonus, developing the skill of empathy won't just make you be able to be kinder to others, but also empathize with yourself more and understand your own emotions to a greater extent. And finally, last but very much not least, I believe, honor. It's a concept that I feel is very often misunderstood. People think of honor and they think of like overweight Middle Eastern patriarchs murdering their own daughters because they had a boyfriend that wasn't of the correct religion. You think of age-old family feuds where it's justified to assassinate a young child because 5 generations ago a young child in your family died and you somehow connected it to the other family. None of that is honor. In fact, honor couldn't be further from those things. Honor is not an external concept. It isn't your power, your reputation, your semblance of anything. There's the big meme of the Ron Swanson masculinity pyramid where he goes, oh, honor, if you need it defined, you don't have it. And I'm not sure that's, like, true. But a lot of people seem to be under that impression that it's this ethereal concept that you can't really put into words. Honor is doing the right thing even when no one is looking. It's not looting the cupboards of the NPC's houses in a video game, even though if you do, they're fully lootable. You don't even get like a tag of, oh, this is a stolen item. If you get detected doing it, nothing bad will happen. They won't even have any negative repercussions because they're NPCs in a video game, but you still don't do it because it's wrong to take people's shit without their express permission. Don't just loot the cupboards if it's a video game. This is just an example to illustrate this. It took me rather a long time to understand that for a lot of people, the decision of whether or not they're going to do something depends pretty much entirely on the consequences that they expect of doing that thing. If they know they can get away with doing something that they want to do, they'll do it. And for the most part, this works fine because it turns out that most of society is set up in a way that if you do bad things, you suffer negative repercussions. Some aspects of society, though, are rather distinctly and famously not like this, and they heavily attract people who do incredibly fucked up things for their entire lives, and the bill never comes due. That's why the Me Too movement is so essential, because it even tried to hold these people to account that were doing one of the most despicable things that you could possibly do as a human being. And they were doing it because they knew they could get away with it. Honor isn't something that anyone else has any sort of control over. Honor is only what you do. No one but yourself can sully your honor, and no one but yourself can make the decisions that lead to your own honorable or dishonorable actions. People can certainly besmirch your reputation. Those two are far from synonymous. Also, it's not your place to defend anyone else's honor either. In fact, you can't. It's literally not possible. I reckon that defending someone else's honor is probably the #1 cause of people mistaking self-righteousness for honor. There's nothing more dishonorable than self-righteousness disguised as honor, because it just rationalizes whatever it is that you want to do as the right thing to do. Legitimately acting honorably, consistently, has a tendency to give you a reputation as someone who acts honorably consistently even when no one is looking, which isn't necessarily true about people who just are performatively honorable, who pretend to have honor but they really don't. And there's a simple arithmetic here in considering that even when you think no one is watching, they still might be. People remember when they find out you did something dishonorable without their knowledge, but conversely, they also remember when they find out you had the opportunity to get away with it but didn't do it. The consequence arithmetic of all this, of course, doesn't really matter to the honorable person. You do the right thing because that's just what you do. It's not about the rewards of honor, which can be rather meager at times. Making decisions this way actually spares you a lot of anguish because you don't spend as much time thinking about what other people might think about what you do. Scheming takes up a lot of brain power, and if you don't do it, you can use all of that brain power to think about puppies instead. Don't get me wrong, living honorably is not easy. There's a lot of spaces where people act dishonorably because you need to act dishonorably in order to get ahead in those spaces. Why do you think there are so few honorable politicians? It's a system that fundamentally relies on honor, but it's built by dishonorable people trying to get their dishonorable cronies to do dishonorable things. Those few honorable politicians that make it through that system get there through not just unfathomable amounts of hard work and sacrifice, but also just luck. A lot of it. In a society like ours, honor can close many doors. Living honorably is going to force you to make a lot of difficult decisions, to do a lot of things the hard way, because sometimes the hard way is just the right way to do it. You always have to take the high road. Always. And Ned Stark gets killed because he always was doing the honorable thing. He was always taking the high road. And after his death, everyone's like, oh, that Ned Stark, what an honorable man he was, but he was still dead. Masculinity isn't about appealing to others, it's about appealing to yourself. And I think nowhere is this more apparent than when it comes to honor, because honor does not derive from the opinions of other people. Honor is not defined by consensus, and it shouldn't be. There is no objective manual of honor that you can peruse. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of manuals. You have the chivalry code, the gentleman's code, the Bushido code, the 5 precepts of Buddhism, the concept of omerta. It's just that none of them are by themselves objectively correct. In fact, a lot of them are drastically opposed to each other in a lot of circumstances. Semi-formal codes of honor are especially common among castes of society that kind of do fucked up things that other people consider unacceptable or only consider acceptable under a very narrow set of circumstances. Like warriors kill. They're supposed to kill other ruthless killers, not the innocent though. But they have the power to do it. They know how to kill. The reason they don't do it is honor. In omerta, you never snitch on anyone, and that holds up criminal enterprises. And this is a good time to bring up the fact that honor is also not doing the wrong thing when everyone is looking. It's one thing to not snitch on organized crime that is rotting your community to the core. It's a whole different thing not to snitch to the Gestapo because you know where the Jews are hiding. Social pressures often fly in the face of what the honorable thing to do is. Codes of honor generally straddle the line of being social conventions. Sometimes breaking codes of honor does have repercussions, like when you get tried for war crimes at The Hague, pig, or when you find yourself sleeping with the fishes. No one can really just tell you what the right and honorable thing is to do in any given situation. It's not a catalog of easy answers. You may have a code of honor that is diametrically opposed to what other people believe their code of honor to be around you, because they think it's dishonorable not to kill gay people, or it's dishonorable not to steal from the homeless. And if you're having trouble coming up with why those things would be considered dishonorable, you've not seen, like, sects and libertarianism. Honor is a deeply personal thing at the end of the day, and also be wary of those who would appeal to your honor. It's one thing to, like, criticize people's honorability. That is ultimately always subjective, but it's a fine thing to do. However, there is a certain class of person, highly manipulative, who themselves have no honor but understand the concept of it and use it to get people with honor to do some extremely fucked up shit. Honor doesn't mean that you need to suffer or sacrifice yourself for other people, and it most certainly doesn't mean that you need to hurt other people. I still encourage you to look into the various honor codes that exist and the social conventions and opinions of the people around you in your own quest to find your own honor and ethics. A code of honor is ironclad, enduring, set in stone, but it also changes over time as you grow as a person in compassion and experience. That may seem paradoxical, but that's just because reality is paradoxical. I'd like to believe that people just inherently can have a sense of what is honorable and what isn't. Because I can feel when people come up to me to do something difficult because it is the honorable thing to do. Like they fess up to something that they would never have been caught doing, and they still own up to it because it's the right thing to do. I have immense respect for that. They have a conscience that tells them that not coming forward would be wrong. Some people are very good at silencing that conscience. Many are trained to do so, like for instance soldiers, but then eventually on that dark and lonely night, it all comes back to you. Others just have self-interest so loud that it drowns out the conscience. A small few, and this is an actual real psychological phenomenon, just have no conscience. But most of us, even if our conscience has been beaten into submission by society, we can still try and listen for what it has to say. And if you have a moment of weakness, your self-interest wins the battle over your conscience in your internal conflict, and you slip up, you do something that was not honorable to do, that's no excuse to completely discard with the concept of honor and be like, oh, well, I can do what I want now, I'm a dishonorable person. The entirety of your honor bears on every single decision that you make. Just because you acted dishonorably yesterday doesn't mean you get to disact honorably again today. Just like when you skipped a day of working out when you should have been working out, you shouldn't go ahead and say, well, I didn't work out yesterday, I'm never working out again, because what's the point? You should work out. And you should be honorable. Honor will often bring you to places where you need to have courage. And courage, I think, is another one of those things that a real man should have. The things that require courage to do will be different for different people, because different people are afraid of different things. Courage is very importantly not being unafraid. You are human. You are going to be afraid. It's fine to have fear. But courage is to do battle with your fear, to fight against it, to confront it, and ultimately overcome it. You're not gonna win every time. That's just a fact. Scary shit is scary, and even the attempt of doing battle with it is very much commendable. That's the point of courage. It's not about winning, it's about trying. Of all the things in this video, I think honor is really the most difficult concept to flag down for yourself and to get a good sense of. Which is why I put it at the end of the video after the whole kindness and self-reliance thing, because I think you need to have a solid grasp of both of those in order to really get started on honor. And you might ask yourself, why would I ever be honorable given the cost that honor comes with? And the answer to that is, because it's the honorable thing to do. Yes, I do realize just how tautological that response is, but I would like to remind you that you're the person who clicked on this video in order to get a template on what modern masculinity should look like. And I think honor is an essential part of that, and one that is often ignored and brushed aside by the more perfidious of masculinity coaches who think of power as a privilege that comes with rewards instead of a burden that you have to carry for others. And really, to round all of this out, to bring the video to one point, it's not so much about masculinity as it is about being a good person. Really, the video shouldn't have been called How to Be a Real Man. It should be called How to Be a Good Person. Another topic so vast and complex that not even a video of this size could possibly fully cover it. I believe women too need to be self-reliant, kind, and honorable, and also all of the other genders and non-genders that anyone has ever come up with out there. Being a real man is, at the end of the day, not about being a man at all. It's about being good. And if the aesthetic, the hobbies, the self-care mechanisms, if those things sort of seem masculine to you, then there you are. Ultimately, if you are there sitting and thinking, I am a man, you're done. You're already a real man. It doesn't matter your background, your past, your name, or your genitals. These are just ideals to strive for that will set you on a path that will bring you closer to your authentic self. And doing so in a way that is beneficial to society as a whole. That's what being a real man is all about, because that's what being a real human being is all about. Thank you very much for watching this monstrous, mutated abomination of a video. It took me a while to make this one. I know I announced it years ago, but here it is. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or the short story collection located here just behind my merchandise. And in that spirit, what else is there to say? Except that maybe I'll put in a clip of me being angry earlier at someone who was like running his car. This is the kind of car you have to drive. It has to make this exact fucking sound. Leave. Stop just standing in the yard. Actually drive. Please, for the love of God. See you around, cunts.